Hey guys, and welcome back to our channel. So in today's video, I want to share with you my seed starting setup. This topic was actually inspired by a viewer who left this comment here on one of our videos. She said that she'd love more information on the seed starting system that I had set up behind me, which she saw in a previous video. And since we're getting to that time of year where it's appropriate to start seeds indoors, I thought now would be the perfect time to show you how I grow all of my own seedlings that will be planted out into our flower fields later this season. I think one of the biggest misconceptions that people have when it comes to starting seeds indoors is that they think they have to have a fancy setup, especially if they want to either grow a lot of flowers or if they want to grow commercially. And I'm here to tell you that simply is not true. As someone who is entering their 4th growing season, I can tell you that I have literally grown thousands upon thousands of seedlings right here in my very own kitchen. And honestly, it hasn't even cost me that much money. So in case you were worried, no, you don't need a fancy greenhouse, you don't need a lot of equipment, and you don't have to invest a lot of money either in this project to get started growing seeds in your own indoor grow space. I promise you, starting seeds, whether you want to start just a few for your own backyard garden or you have interest in growing lots, it doesn't have to be a complicated process. So let me show you how we do it. Now, starting seeds indoors, it's not a necessary step to growing flowers. The purpose of this process is really to get a head start on the growing season. By sowing seeds inside when it's still cold and then planting seedlings into the garden once the weather has warmed, you'll be able to enjoy blooms in your garden much sooner. But if all this I'm about to share with you, if it all seems like a little too much, then by all means, you can skip this step and you can sow seeds directly into your garden once the threat of frost has passed. There's plenty of fast-growing annuals that do well direct-seeded into the ground. Things like grasses and sunflowers and of course zinnias. These flowers, they all sprout within just a few days, so with a little patience and a little bit of care, you'll still get to enjoy plenty of flowers in just one season. Okay, so let's start by talking about what supplies you'll need for this project. Now, to start seeds indoors, you basically have to give your seedlings an environment that they can thrive in, something that somewhat mimics the conditions they'd otherwise receive outdoors. So obviously your plants are going to need some sunlight, and so we use artificial LED lights. They're just linkable 4-foot shop lights, which we buy off of Amazon. Your plants are also going to need some sort of soil or planting medium. This is just a potting mix I picked up at our local garden center, but there's usually plenty of options even at the grocery stores. And then you're going to need something, a container that can hold your planting medium. So we use these cell trays. And your plants are also going to need some water. So this is where our bottom watering tray comes in handy. This is a no-hole bottom tray. I simply fill this about halfway full with water. I insert my seed tray inside, and it allows the soil to really wick up that moisture so I can water my seed tray without fear of displacing any seeds, which could happen if I were to water overhead. Now, there are some things that are nice to have that will likely increase your germination rates and give you a little bit more consistent results. These things include a humidity dome, which I have right here, and a heat mat. And I'll show you a little bit later how these work, but know that they aren't 100% necessary. And I say this because my first year starting seeds indoors, I was on a very tight budget and I couldn't justify the added expense. So I chose to use the tools that were absolutely necessary, which for me meant that I spent my money on the soil, the lights, and the seed trays. Even now, I grow on such a scale that it doesn't make sense for me to have a humidity dome or a heat mat for every single tray. So I'm extra careful monitoring the conditions inside my home, and I tend to use these tools on some seed varieties that are harder to germinate. For instance, I find that I have better results when I start my celosia and my snapdragon seeds using the humidity dome and heat mat combo. On the other hand, zinnias, they grow so easily that I don't waste my time using either the heat mat or the humidity dome on those. I encourage you to play around with the tools that you're using. You know, one of my favorite quotes, and honestly I'm not even sure who says it, but it's through action you'll find clarity. You have to play around and experience some successes and some and some failures in order to really gain an understanding of what works for you and your situation. Now, one last thing that you're going to want to have on hand are garden tags so that you know exactly what you're growing in each and every tray. Now, a quick note about seed trays, because I find there's often a lot of confusion around them. Every once in a while I get a question about, well, what's the right size tray to grow blank, and insert whatever flower variety you want to here. And what most people don't realize is that selecting the right seed tray, it often comes down to personal preference and how much space that you have. Now, here are some examples of some different size trays. This is a 128 cell tray. This is a standard 72 cell tray. And then this is smaller yet. This is actually a 288 cell tray. So as you can see, the trays themselves take up the same amount of room, and what changes is the size of each growing cell, of the growing space allotted for each individual seed. So if I had 4 of these 288 cell trays lined up on my shelf, I could grow almost 1,200 seedlings up within just 4 feet of space. Compared if I were using these 72 cell trays, under that same 4-foot space, I'd be growing just under 300 seedlings. Now, that's a big difference, especially if you're limited on room. But here's the kicker. Know that you have to take into consideration the rate of growth at which your seedlings are growing. If your seedlings outgrow their space before it's time to plant them out in the garden, they have to bump up your seedlings, which means you'll have to transplant your seedlings from one tray size into a larger tray to allow for proper root growth. This can be a time-consuming task, so I prefer to start my seeds in the tray size, which will allow them enough space to grow until they're ready to be transplanted outside. That's why the 72 cell tray is my favorite. Almost everything we grow here at Two Sisters Flower Farm gets started in a 72 cell tray. The exception is sweet peas, which I do start in 50 cell trays, only because they have a larger root system and can really benefit from as much growing space as I can give them. So now that you know what you'll need for seed starting, let me quickly run you through how we do it. You're going to want to start out with some moist soil, wet enough so that it's damp to the touch, but not so wet that you're wringing water out of it if you were to squeeze it. I prefer to use the assembly line method, so I'll fill all the trays that I want seeded at once before moving on to the next task. Now, when it comes to seeds, the general rule of thumb is that you'll want to bury your seeds at a depth that is twice their height. So with larger seeds like cosmos and zinnias, I'll make a seed indentation into each cell so that the seed has a spot to go. For small seeds like snapdragons or black-eyed Susans, they're so small that I won't actually bury them. I'll simply lay them on the surface of my soil. Now I sow an entire tray. If the seeds need to be covered up, that's when I'll add more to the top. Now with every tray, I'll give it a label. I like to write down the variety that I'm growing and also the date it was sown, so I can keep track of things like how fast the seeds germinate, and so that I know too when those seedlings can be transplanted outside into my garden. The next step is to bring your trays into a warm environment where they can sprout and put on some growth. Now, like I mentioned earlier, if I find that I'm trying to grow a variety that's a bit trickier to get started, now is the time that I'll use a humidity dome and a heat mat. The humidity dome, as you can see here, allows condensation to form on the inside. Maintaining the level of moisture, that's helpful when seeds are just sprouting. If you're using a humidity dome, however, you'll want to monitor your seeds closely. When your tray is about halfway to 3/4 sprouted, that's when you're going to want to pop off a humidity dome. What happens when you leave your humidity dome on too long is that you'll start to notice your seedlings dying. It's something known as dampening off. So pop off those domes to allow for good airflow, which will help to grow healthy seedlings. The heat mat too, it helps maintain the proper soil temperature. Most seeds, they germinate with around 70 degrees of heat, and while my kitchen area where I'm growing my seedlings, it usually maintains a temp around 65 to 70 degrees, the heat mat helps ensure that the actual soil temperature, it reaches that optimum 70 degrees. Everything else I grow that doesn't get that humidity dome heat mat combo goes directly to my light rack. Now I know all of this, it may seem to be overkill, but your seedlings, they need a strong light source. While you may think that your kitchen or some room in your house gets plenty of sunlight each day, the reality is that it's not enough to produce healthy seedlings. If you place your seedlings on a windowsill, what you'll start to notice is that your seedlings will get leggy as they reach toward the light. This is where these LED lights can be beneficial. Now I have my lights attached to this wire shelving unit. I bought off of Amazon. I'll link this in the description box below as well if you're interested. Now if you're not growing lots and lots of seedlings, you can certainly buy a smaller shelving unit with fewer shelves. I do recommend, however, that you search for one whose width matches the width of your LED lights. Here you can see I use a 4-foot wide shelf, and my shop lights are 4-foot wide as well. What I love about this setup is that within this 6-tier shelf, I can fit 20 trays. If I'm growing everything in a 72 cell tray, within this small space, I can grow over 1,400 seedlings. When you really break it down, this system is not only a space saver, but a money saver too, especially if you weigh against the cost of growing in a heated greenhouse. So the lights, I attached to my wire shelves using the hardware that came with them and zip ties. I keep my lights just a few inches above my seed trays, and as my seedlings grow, I may raise my light so that the seedlings never come into contact with the light itself. And this is really all there is. Now I monitor my seed trays daily. I'm looking at how moist each tray is and watering from the bottom like I described earlier when necessary. About a week before my seeds are ready to go outside into the garden, I prepare them for their transition to the outside by hardening them off. So anytime you're taking seedlings from a protected environment like what's inside my kitchen right now to one that's a bit more varied like you'd experience outside, you'll want to give them time to adjust. I harden my seedlings off by slowly increasing the time that they're left outside. Now on the first day I may leave them outside for 3 or 4 hours, and then I'll bring them back inside at night. As the week progresses, I'll gradually increase that time, and once the week is over, they'll be more acclimated to shifts in temperature and things like wind and sun exposure. After that, you'll simply plant them out into your garden, and in no time at all, you'll be enjoying your very own cutting garden. Pretty cool, right? Now, if you have more questions about seed starting, don't be afraid to leave them in the comments below and I'll answer them there. I truly hope that you found this video helpful. If you did, we'd love it if you give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and as always, I will see you in the next video.